I'm David Hepworth. Thanks for clicking this Word in Your Ear podcast, videocast, thing for which there is no name. Mark Ellen and I have been creating in this line since 2007. And if any of it has met with your approval, then please click to subscribe because it helps. Leave a comment because we like to hear from you, and maybe even consider becoming a Patreon supporter because then, well, you'll be one of us. Visit patreon.com/wordinyour-ear for details.
You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
Well, obviously, this week, dominated by the deaths of two Californian musicians, both of whom, it struck me, Mark, were hailed as geniuses in popular music. And obviously, we're talking about Sly Stone and Brian Wilson. And one of the things that made me wonder was whether we really should hail people as geniuses in pop music, whether it makes anybody any happier to do this. You know, that it always seems to give people something that it's almost impossible for them to live up to. Do you think that's true?
Absolutely. Surely in any field at all, not just pop music. I mean, it's just from then on, you're just expected to do something supernatural. And if you're going to be plagued by self-doubt, as in fact, their lives are in that respect, were very, very similar.
Yes.
And, I'm not sure what brings that about. You know, they were both multi-instrumentalists very early on and could play any number of instruments at age 7 or whatever. And that starts to bring in the Mozart. Mozart, again, is another thing. Calling somebody the musical Mozart, to blame, which is a fantastically slack way of saying, A, they did extraordinarily complicated compositions, and B, we can still only get across the level of pop music we're trying to talk about here by making comparisons with classical music, which is ridiculous and unnecessary.
It is.
So
I think, right.
Why should we still hark back to classical music? He's a kind of Beethoven. Yes. Well, no, he's a kind of Brian Wilson.
Absolutely.
He's a kind of Sly Stone.
Yeah, no, you're right. There's also that thing that I've always been taken by, the idea that genius is not a thing that people have. It's a thing that happens. Genius takes place in a particular set of circumstances at a particular time. And this always seems to me to be a more productive way of thinking about popular music than anything else, because it's so much a question of golden ages, isn't it? Where people come together at a certain age in a group, with the right kind of producer, certain set of circumstances, the time is right for them to do this, that, or the other. And, it's very hard to consistently do that for 40, 50 years, because it tends to be a kind of fleeting thing. There is that old theory that in popular music, you have 3 years, or in entertainment, it's a 3-year period, really. And obviously people contradict that with reference to the Beatles. And then
you can be a genius whether or not you're born with genius, but you can be a genius in a certain context, can't you? And in Brian Wilson's case, it's surrounded by the right people, the right musicians,
at the right time,
right band, the right time, that moment in his life, the right time in his life personally. Then all those things kind of coincide and the stars align and something happens. But it's just, Derek Taylor, we should mention. Derek Taylor, who'd been the press agent and representative for the Beatles, of course, then went across to America and took on the Beach Boys in, I think, 65 or 66? Anyway, something but he was behind the big campaign for the Smile album. And his concept was, let's promote Brian Wilson as the genius.
Yeah. I'm sure he didn't. He didn't reckon on the kind of long range implications of that. He obviously just a line he wrote in a press release.
Yeah.
But it landed, and it's still there all those years later. That the obits it's visionary, it's auteur, it's these kind of words, that seem to me to bear little relationship to what people actually did, to the nature of their work, But, the most powerful thing
once
is...
they're a genius, they're excused any kind of behavior. When you say, well, that's he or she is a genius, they're doing what they do, and you've got to let them get on with it because that's what they were put on this earth to do, and they can behave any way they want to. They can build any number of sand pits to stand in while composing. All that comes into play, doesn't it?
And what happens, it's quite interesting, actually, there's the parallels with, Brian Wilson and Smile, obviously, which we were talking about only the other week, weren't we, with David Leaf, who's written a book all about the Smile phenomenon. Yeah. And Smile, Derek Taylor was no doubt writing loads of those press releases to explain the fact that this thing hadn't been completed at that point. And something similar happened with Sly in 1970-71 with the record that eventually became There's a Riot Going On, which was long delayed, And what happens then is the PR is saying...
You can't hurry genius.
You can't hurry genius. And there is the genius is stricken with appalling worry and uncertainty about what they've done, and actually doesn't really want to finish it because they're frightened of the consequences. Unsurprisingly.
The moment you finish it is the moment you'll be judged.
You'll be judged.
You can prolong the moment you're still a genius and your reputation is still untarnished.
Yeah. Anyway,
the fact that you're a genius makes it impossible to live up to whatever people are expecting, which is more and more and more.
Yeah, so that's the kind of critical expectation, that surrounds those two names and has surrounded those two names for more than 50 years. A very, very long kind of afterlife after the hit stopped. Their legends absolutely grew, and it's just worth thinking back, partly because you and I are old enough to remember these people when they were cluttering up the charts. It's worth going back in both cases to look at what they actually did. That Sly, Sylvester Stewart, born in Texas, I think, but grew up in California. And was a kind of, as you say, multi-instrumentalist from an early age. But it was one of those kind of hustlers, radio DJs, producers, fixers on the edge of the music business in California. And produced bands, didn't he? I mean, he produced the likes of the Charlatans, those kind of early psychedelic groups, before he kind of put together Sly and the Family Stone. They were a fairly unprecedented aggregation, weren't they, really? Male, female, black, white, family, non-family.
Oh, do you remember when we watched when it came out in 2021, Questlove's movie about the Summer of Soul, about the Harlem Cultural Festival? I can remember us talking then about what it's like seeing those. I think there's only about 2 songs by Sly and the Family Stone, and they're among, Nina Simone and B.B. King and staple singers Gladys Knight and Stevie Wonder. And they come on and they look phenomenal. This is, what was it, August 69? The men, women, fabulous looking people, Cynthia Robinson playing the trumpet and singing, and that kind of funk soul, and you'd never seen anything like it. And it was interesting, at a tangent, that was now hailed as the kind of Black Woodstock, and in fact was about 3 weeks before the other Woodstock.
The White Woodstock.
The cultural difference is so extraordinary. This is a series of very, very highly choreographed and worked. They're kind of like club acts, actually, playing on a small stage to a relatively small audience of a few thousand people in a park. And it's not about spectacle. It's not about bombast and noise. It's about songs, about harmony. It's about arrangement. It's about community, isn't it? It's about civil rights. When Sly goes on, I don't think the NYPD would do the security, and I think the Black Panthers are actually surrounding the stage.
Lovely.
And you see that, you think, this is amazing. It is of enormous cultural significance. And there, 3 weeks later, it is 10 years after playing I'm Going Home or whatever. I mean, I'm picking on a rather easy target there, but, there is enormous cultural chasm between the two, isn't there?
Well, they'd already, they had loads of hits, Dance to the Music and Stand and Milady and all these kind of things, which all kind of fused what was becoming described as dance music for probably for the first time. You took for granted that Motown had always been dance music, whereas, Sly's hits were, dance. They were a celebration of dance music, weren't they? And there was also, they had what I can only describe as kind of Age of Aquarius styling to them, because don't forget, in the background of all this stuff, and you cannot underestimate it, the tribal love rock musical Hair was playing all over the world, wasn't it? And it was an absolute sensation, and was very much a celebration of that kind of, cosmic cowboy look, and so then they appear at Woodstock. And of course, what happens at Woodstock is that, thanks to Martin Scorsese's cameras and, brilliant editing and all this kind of stuff, all these performers appear utterly elevated by suddenly having been kind of caressed by cinema, and Sly and the Family Stone has struck me that of all the acts who played Woodstock that weekend, they were the only ones to take, apart from Shannon R, to take the stage in what you might call stage clothes. Do you know what I mean? Those white buckskin jackets. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And they went on at night. So they were black figures wearing white clothes against a black sky. It was an extraordinary spectacle. And the crowning moment I seem to recall, I haven't seen it for a while, is when they're saying, I want to take you higher. And I want to take you higher is the Sly and the Family Stone signature song. That really is. That's what we're here for, to take you higher, in a very kind of gospel fashion, It's a very churchy in many ways. And it climaxes with him, clapping his hands above his head with the fringes of the buckskin jacket, moving in the darkness, and they slow it down, but you can still hear the soundtrack. It was absolutely magical moment, and they looked like nothing you'd ever seen before. And that's
so true. And all the other actors dressed like members of the audience. Absolutely. They're just wearing kind of loons, tie-dye T-shirts.
These people, they had come from Mars, extraordinary. Of course, in the wake of that, Sly and the Family Stone were kind of the biggest act in the world for about a year, and until Sly's habit of not showing up for big shows, rather caught up with him, and they became the least reliable live attraction in the United States. In fact,
what was your story about him being late for Madison Square Garden?
Well, they played Madison Square Garden on September 11th, 1971, and the audience were in the garden, getting revved up, waiting for him to come on stage, stamping their feet and cheering. What they didn't know is his plane had only just arrived. It only just touched down that second at JFK. So the chances
to get through passport, whatever.
The chances of him getting there that evening were slim at most, and so he was utterly reckless, and so you go back to that point. He's hailed as a genius, and he starts behaving in a manner that he sort of thinks geniuses ought to behave, and the most extreme example of this is he goes back on stage at Madison Square Garden in 1974. And you may remember this, married his girlfriend, Kathy Silver,
on stage.
On stage, live. I don't think the marriage lasted terribly long, but, and by then he sort of peaked. I mean, he peaked in 1971. There's a riot going on with, of course, the record that he'd been laboring over or just mucking him out with, whatever, in a basement in Beverly Hills for ages, and CBS were going crazy. When are you going to get this record? And don't forget, these are the days when people put out 2 albums a year, and so they very soon get very impatient. But he'd been working on that for ages, not with the Family Stone. He'd fallen out with Larry Graham and so forth, the great bass player, and but he was mainly working on it as in the basement with the likes of Bobby Womack and Billy Preston and kind of old musicians he knew who just come in and do bits. And out of this, I mean, if you listen to that record now, it's disturbing. It sounds sort of incomplete, and yet it is massively influential, I think, in all kinds of ways. Well, the number of
samples.
Oh, yeah. Well,
I mean, all the people, Janet Jackson, the Black Eyed Peas, Public Enemy, Snoop Dogg, Roots, LL Cool J. I mean, it's part of the DNA of Black American music, and it's just the number of times that record's been picked up on and reworked into recent recordings.
But I think it's one of the most influential records of the years since. That I think without Sly's There's a Riot Going On, I mean, he changed the way Miles Davis made music, let alone anybody else, Curtis Mayfield, and, Massive Attack's inconceivable without Sly's There's a Riot Going On, The Roots, Prince, D'Angelo, all the hip hop, it's only because what he did was kind of, and I think he pretty much did it by mistake, was he made the most adventurous record he knew how to. And it created a field where you could do all kinds of things you had previously never been able to do. And of course, because of Family Affair, which, thanks to a brilliant mixing engineer, he managed to get rid of the kind of layers that Sly had built up on top of other layers. It was a huge, huge record, to such an extent that There's a Riot Going On, which is as radical an album as you could ever wish to hear, even now, was the Christmas #1 in the United States of America in 1971. It's absolutely extraordinary.
It seems astonishing, doesn't it?
It's just
as radical a record as that.
It's like finding out Miles Davis' Bitches Brew has been #1 for a month. You know what I mean, on the main chart. It's absolutely extraordinary idea. And so, he did. He had the odd flicker after that, If You Want Me to Stay, and so forth. But he kind of drifted off into. Well, there were a lot of drugs involved, and there was a lot of mad self-indulgence, and there was getting married to your intended on stage at Madison Square Garden, and then he just
the best man speech dragged on a bit,
and then he just kind of. There were comebacks, weren't there? Wasn't there a bizarre comeback in? Don't I remember Jim Irvin from Mojo? Jim Irvin going down to see Sly and the Family Stone, making a comeback in Bournemouth or somewhere like that. Don't I seem to remember that about 20 years ago? Is that right? But
Jim getting massively excited about it and saying it was just an absolutely stupendous occasion, and then it all went quiet again, didn't it? Really, we didn't. I don't blame him. He was just so pleased to see him.
No, sure, but Sly, the legend grew massively. Even it kind of occupied the space where the activity should have been. Really,
Yes,
and so a massively influential figure that we shall not see the like of again. But that influence is in a very short period of time. It's 1967 to 1971, and then it's kind of over, really.
Well, you could probably say the same about Brian Wilson, because if you looked, I think even now, the Beach Boys everybody remembers really is the Beach Boys of, isn't it, of 63 to 65, 66, around then. It's those 3 or 4 years.
It's interesting. I've noted down, Mark, 5 little periods where Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys intersected with my teenage and young adult life. And it's quite specific. The early 60s, and probably even slightly pre-Beatles, really. I can remember those kind of records like Surf City by Jan and Dean, which he, do you know that? Which he wrote the tune for and produced.
Fabulous.
These, no, I don't remember, if I just promote the, the things that made Surf City attractive as a notional community for those looking for somewhere to settle in 1963. You may remember that the proud boast of the community was they had 2 girls for every guy. Do you remember this?
That's right.
Yeah, they had 2 swinging
Where do I
honeys.
sign?
2 swinging honeys for every guy, and all you've got to do is wink your eye. That was the attractive thing about surf
Where
culture.
could it possibly go wrong?
Yes. So there was that, and it was just this great celebration of kind of freedom and sunshine and cars and mobility. That's what Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys initially meant. And then the next thing I started to notice via kind of Don't Worry Baby and In My Room and these other things is that there was this painfully sensitive side to he couldn't keep up with going out with the boys and on the taking the surfboards to the beach or going on the hot rods. He wanted to go in his room and frankly wallow in self-pity, which was immensely attractive to a 14, 15-year-old
I thought
boy.
that was a brilliant song. I mean, I think it was Gary Usher who wrote it, but I mean, it was his idea, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But they went back, didn't they, that night, and they wrote it in the room at home. And that whole idea that when everyone else was writing boy meets girl songs and rhyming kind of charms with arms or whatever, he was writing, how does it go? He says, I do my dreaming and my scheming, I lie awake and pray. That's the one, isn't it?
Yeah,
do my crying and my sighing, and I laugh at yesterday. It's the idea that and he was how old? I mean, he was 21 or 20 when he wrote that.
Something like that.
That song came out. I thought that's an amazing way of trying to connect with people that was, not just about confidence and parties.
No,
and,
definitely not. Definitely not. There was
really interesting.
There was definitely a kind of, well, almost a female side, It's interesting when you think about songs like "Wouldn't It Be Nice," which again I don't think he wrote the words for. That would have been what's his name, Tony Asher, who wrote most of those. Wouldn't it be nice if we were older? Then we wouldn't have to wait so long. It's all about playing houses.
Yes.
It's about playing doctors and nurses, And then did he write the whole of I Guess I'm Dumb, which must have come from around this time, which Glenn Campbell famously recorded a wonderful version of it. Imagine writing a song called I Guess I'm Dumb. That takes, you have to admit your vulnerability to do that, don't you? But then the third thing, so in 1966, I'm at home, off school. I must have had some kind of man flu, boy flu, or whatever, because, I wasn't often allowed to stay at home.
Anything to avoid double maths.
There you go.
The old stomach's playing up. Yeah.
Absolutely. And this was during the time of pirate radio. And I think our pirate radio station that we could pick up in Yorkshire at the time was 210. I think it broadcast from off Scarborough. And that was the week that Good Vibrations came out. And Radio 210 used to play Good Vibrations literally once an hour. And they said, we're going to do this. We're going to play it every hour. And I can remember lying in bed listening to this thing through the static of the AM signal and thinking, well, surely I'll get bored with this if I hear it that often. And then realizing, no, I didn't get bored with it at all. It was
intensified your interest in it.
Absolutely. Because, it's this masterpiece of, it seems to me, of editing rather than anything else. He got these brilliant musicians, the Wrecking Crew, to play the bits that he heard in his head. Then when the Beach Boys came back off tour, they sang their vocals, and Mike Love provided the lyrics and so forth, and it was just miraculously just put together, But then I felt that the Beach Boys kind of, because Heroes and Villains didn't really happen in the same way, they kind of drifted away in the late 60s, it seemed to me. And the thing that brought them back to my mind, and we were talking about this again with David Leaf the other day, when we were talking about Smile, was Tom Nolan's 2-part piece in Rolling Stone magazine called The California Saga, which was, for the first time, the story of the kind of hell of the Wilson family, and the difficulties with the father, Murray, who'd been their manager, and the fallings out between the brothers and Brian's various problems. And suddenly there they appeared they were bearded. I don't even remember this, when the Beach Boys were bearded. They suddenly appeared like Old Testament prophets, these former Beach Boys in their Pendleton shirts suddenly re-emerged looking like somebody from the more obscure books of the Bible, And so suddenly we
that old
learned...
ruse that stopped screaming at us.
It's true. And so suddenly the Beach Boys became a kind of tragic narrative, because this is what was really going on when you were hearing and enjoying Pet Sounds and so forth.
Which makes a lot of that music sound more plaintive now, actually, doesn't it?
It does.
Gives it some kind of emotional resonance.
It does. And so Nick Kent then wrote, not long after that, started writing a similar thing in The NME, which was a kind of 2-part massive great. Let's give respect to the Beach Boys. And then there was the Beach Boys' Endless Summer album, which was put out in 1974, I think, in the United States. And so suddenly they're kind of reborn as this group playing, fun, and Let 'Em Run Wild and all these kind of things for kind of hippified audiences. And it's really interesting if you look at the cover of Endless Summer. It's got kind of the beach at the front, and then peering through the undergrowth, the biblical figures with the beards that you've recently got to know. Yes. And anyway, just to finish, I found it yesterday. I have a picture of me and my wife, then girlfriend,
you said it to me,
at Wembley Stadium, seeing the Beach Boys, supporting Elton John, and with the Eagles were on there as well.
1974?
1975, Mark. It is
75.
50 years ago next week.
Wow.
Next Saturday. No, that's my point. Now, this is my point. So that was 50 years ago, and we were already celebrating the past. And that was 50 years ago. So when we
They've always been a nostalgia group, haven't they?
Sort of.
Yeah, even in '65. I mean, I was 8 when their first single came out, I think. But I kind of looked at them as being nostalgic, looking back to Surfing Safari, in the late '60s or whatever. God, that was 50 years ago.
50 years ago. And if you said to us at that time, in 50 years' time, people will still be talking about this, and the kind of the idea of Brian Wilson's California as being a kind of lost paradise that we can never get back to. It's still an immensely powerful thing, isn't it?
It is. And it also points up how different our feelings are about California too. The California of 1963, 65, 60 years ago, as you say, the glinting chrome bumpers on the cars and the girls and the surfing and the beaches. And now California you associate with something completely different. With fires and riots and tension and police brutality. It's funny. That's just that it's completely changed. Also, I thought it was interesting that, that the reaction, because Beach Boys are one of the last groups, I think, that absolutely everybody loves. It's not possible not to like the Beach Boys. And yet they're really interesting because Brian Wilson effectively left that group as a kind of working operative 60 years ago. A lot of people don't quite know they know the Beach Boys, but they're not quite sure of Brian Wilson. They've got no real connection with him, which is understandable. So it was a very much a different kind of reaction. You know, if Elton John was to die or Neil Young was to die, people have a very, very powerful connection with that person. But I've just been playing a lot of it recently, and I've got 3 great moments, Dave. Can I give you my 3 great moments?
Yeah, go on.
3 great moments. We were doing this the other day. We were talking to Stuart McConey about Penny Lane, and we all went through Penny Lane, picked out one tiny little moment of the song, which was the best bit. But I think the 3 great Brian Wilson moments are California Girls. The first 20 seconds of that is an overture. Do you remember that? You've got California Girls. And it's a kind of instrumental, slightly autumnal, slightly rather poignant instrumental overture. And it's a bit like, you know, the traditions of Paul McCartney's writing in Here, There and Everywhere starts with a kind of a little interlude, doesn't it? And this reminds me of a Broadway musical. You get the overture for 20 seconds and you can imagine pouring in from the wings all the singers and dancers before the song starts, you know. So that's one of them, which I thought was really interesting. The other is Heroes and Villains, which is just the most extraordinary song because it's all those different sections. There's one at 46 seconds in, I wrote this down this morning, where it's one of those tiny little vocal harmony pieces, another one at 1 minute 45. But the best of the lot, at 2 minutes 35, is what I think you'd call a barbershop quartet moment. Do you know where he goes, I've been in this town so long to the city, I'm fit with the stuff to ride in the rough and sunny down snuff, I'm all right by the heroes and villains. That bit is just absolutely...
It slows, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It slows down.
It's a very barbershop move, that, isn't it? You know, their heads are going together as they sing that particular bit.
It keeps changing. It changes gear and it changes pace. And they're just different movements, different emotional
and
movements.
I think it's interesting you should say this because it points up how he kind of keyed into American pop and music traditions that weren't rock and roll. You know, that's all, you know, what was Brian Wilson's biggest influence? The Four Freshmen. That's what he wanted to sound like. And it wasn't Chuck Berry, although he could do Chuck Berry as well as anybody.
Local groups, it's barbershop, it's doo-wop, it's all that stuff, you know.
Yeah, Broadway shows.
Totally different. Broadway shows, precisely.
Yeah.
And I think he's the lead vocal on that bit in Heroes and Villains, that really plaintive, a beautiful high voice. It's so good. And the last bit I think is in Good Vibrations, which is just about 1 second in Good Vibrations, where it's the section after you got to keep those love and good vibrations that are happening with her. And at 2 minutes 53, Dave,
go on.
There is a chord, a kind of
yes,
and you can probably hear it now.
You can,
and it goes back to good, and the whole thing changes again. And that is just it's a kind of Beatles chord too. It's one of those bittersweet chords. It's got little blue notes in it, and it's just a big vocal symphonic chord, and changes the gear. It's kind of sweet but slightly curdled, you know.
Yeah.
And those are my 3 moments.
I'll just chuck in one, which is the opening line of "Don't Worry, Baby," which I think was 1964.
Yes,
I think the lyrics were written by Roger Christian. Roger Christian, who was a DJ, who was very big in the hot rod community. It was always the man you call if you wanted to knock out some lyrics for a hot rod song. Anyway, on this occasion, the opening line of "Don't Worry, Baby," which I'm sure people are aware of, goes, "Well, it's been building up inside of me for, I don't know how long." Now, I counted the number of syllables. I've forgotten what it is. It's a lot of syllables, that is. And you go and listen to that record, and it sings just like, you know, just like butter, that whole thing. You know what I mean? Yes. It doesn't sound joined up. It doesn't sound awkward at all. You know, it just.
No, the clever thing is that's conversational, isn't it? It's not like the classic lyric, chiseled lyric, which is a kind of poetry and it's slightly artificial. That's conversational, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And you know, and presumably Roger Christian wrote. Well, I don't know. Did Brian Wilson write the tune first? Did Roger Christian write the lyrics first? But whatever, you know, the two were absolutely married perfectly. No, I think you're quite right in your choice of the three. But I'm sure people could come up with 20. Because Brian Wilson's music was full of what we call greatest bits. And the greatest bits are more important than the greatest hits.
You're tuned to Word in Your Ear, the longest continuous conversation in rock and roll.
We can't finish without just congratulating Sir Roger Daltrey. There's three words we never thought we would.
In my head, he's always been Sir Roger Daltrey. I don't know why. There's just certain people get to that point we just assume they've been knighted.
But he finally is knighted in the King's birthday honours for his sterling work for the Teenage Cancer Trust, which has been going on a long time now, and he's he should definitely be applauded for that. I think that's very much deserved. I must just throw in the fact that my two daughters both went to see Beyonce at Tottenham this week on different nights. They were fortunate enough that they didn't go last Saturday when it poured with the rain, so the weather was good, and they both had a fantastic time, and they both told me individually how they responded. Shall I tell you, Mark? They cried. They cried.
Oh.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.